The Praetorian Guard. Chapter 8. Into the Shadows. The team boarded their stealth ship, the hum of the engines filling the hangar as they prepared to launch. The darkened bay lights flickered as the ship's systems came online. The hum of the engines reverberated through the stealth ship as it hurtled toward the Silong sector, the low vibrations filling the cabin like a steady heartbeat. John sat in silence, his body strapped to the cold metal seat, his pulse quickening with every passing moment. The darkened interior was bathed in the dim glow of red emergency lighting, casting long shadows across the faces of his teammates. He felt the weight of the mission bearing down on him, heavier than the tactical gear strapped to his chest. It was real now, no more simulations or training exercises. The mission was live, and they were headed into enemy territory to carry out an assassination ordered directly by the Emperor. Duke Darius Cool, a noble with dangerous ambitions and ties to the black market, had to be eliminated. The Duke had overstepped, meddling in the illegal trade of deridium, and, worse, involving the Prime Minister's son in his schemes, resulting in the young man's death. The Emperor had made his decision, and now it was up to the shadows of the night to carry it out. Joan's mind raced as the ship sped through the void. His heart thudded in his chest, the anticipation building. He trained for weeks, every day preparing for a moment like this, but the thought of pulling the trigger on an assassination mission made the weight of his role even heavier. There would be no room for mistakes. Mark, seated across from John, leaned forward, his usual cocky grin replaced by a sharp focus. "You all right there, John Loy?" he asked, breaking the tense silence that had filled the ship. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but his tone was still light, as if trying to ease the tension. John nodded, his throat dry. "Yeah, just thinking." Mark chuckled softly. "Try not to think too much before a mission. It'll eat you alive. When we land, let the training take over." John gave him a small nod, though the anxiety still gnawed at him. This was his first real mission. The Shadows operated on the edge of the Dominion's rules, doing the Emperor's dirty work from the shadows, cleaning up problems that could destabilize the Empire. Now, John was part of that machine. He glanced over at Sarah, who stood near the cockpit, speaking quietly with the pilot. Her posture was calm, her movements controlled. The leader of the team, Sarah, had done this countless times before, but John could see the tension in her shoulders, the responsibility weighing on her. She caught Joan's gaze, gave him a small nod, and turned back to the pilot. "We're entering the Silong sector now." The pilot's voice crackled over the comm system. "Engaging stealth mode." The ship's hum quieted, the lights dimming as the vessel slipped into stealth mode. John peered through the small window beside him, watching as the distant lights of the Silong sector came into view. The asteroid field that marked the perimeter of Duke Darius territory loomed ahead, a sprawling network of industrial facilities and defense systems spread across jagged rocks. Sarah moved back to the center of the cabin, her voice steady as she addressed the team. "We're 20 minutes out from the target. Everyone knows their role. Stick to the plan and we'll be in and out before anyone knows we were there. Marta, you'll disable their surveillance and external defenses. Son, you'll handle any traps or explosives along the way. Sarah, you'll manage internal comms and security overrides. Mark, you're on combat detail, keep the mercenaries off us. John, you're with me. We'll take out the Duke." John nodded, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline as the plan solidified in his mind. He had been briefed, and he knew the layout of the compound by heart. They would land in a blind spot, breach the service tunnels, and infiltrate the Duke's private quarters. Quick, clean, and quiet. The minutes ticked by, each second dragging longer than the last. John clenched and unclenched his fists, trying to calm the tension building in his muscles. He had been on edge ever since they boarded the ship, but now, as they closed in on their target, the full weight of the mission pressed down on him. Finally, the pilot's voice came through again, low and controlled. "Approaching the landing zone, touchdown in 60 seconds. Sarah stood by the hatch, her eyes scanning the team. "Final checks," she ordered, her voice calm but firm. Marta, sitting beside Salah, worked quickly on her tablet, linking into the Duke's surveillance system.
"I'll have their eyes down before we even touch the ground,"
she said, her fingers flying across the screen.
"No alarms, no alerts."
Sun ran a quick check on his disarming tools, methodically adjusting the settings on the EMP charges he had prepared for any electronic traps.
"I'll clear the path, no problem."
Salah gave a sharp nod.
"Comms will be down the moment we breach. No one will call for help."
Mark grinned as he strapped his rifle to his chest.
"You worry about the tech. I'll handle the fun part."
John tightened the straps on his vest, his fingers trembling slightly as the seconds counted down. He wasn't nervous about the gear, everything was in place. What unnerved him was the thought of what would happen when they finally stepped foot on the Duke's territory. Assassination wasn't like any operation he had trained for. The target was more than just a name on a briefing document. It was a man. A man with power, influence, and soldiers at his disposal.
"Touchdown,"
the pilot said, his voice steady.
"You're clear to deploy."
The hatch hissed open, and cold, thin air rushed into the cabin. Joan's breath caught in his throat as he stared out at the barren surface of the asteroid. The compound loomed in the distance, a massive industrial fortress surrounded by security turrets and patrolling guards. The dull glow of the facility's lights reflected off the jagged rock, casting long, eerie shadows across the ground. Sarah motioned for the team to move, her movements crisp and controlled. The team followed, stepping out into the darkness with silent precision. John fell in behind Sarah, his heart hammering in his chest as they advanced. Every step felt heavier, the tension building with each passing second. They moved quickly across the rocky terrain, staying low and out of sight as they approached the perimeter. Marta knelt beside a small access terminal, connecting her tablet to the compound surveillance system. Within seconds, the lights on the nearby cameras flickered and died, leaving the compound blind.
"They're down,"
Marta whispered, her voice barely audible over the comms.
"We're clear to proceed."
Sarah motioned for Sun to move forward. The explosives expert moved with the calm confidence of someone who had disarmed 100 traps before. He approached the first checkpoint, a heavily guarded entrance with automated turrets, and knelt beside a hidden control panel. With a few precise movements, he disabled the sensors, ensuring they wouldn't trigger the alarm.
"Path clear,"
Sun said quietly.
"Let's move."
Jean's breath quickened as they slipped past the checkpoint, every muscle in his body coiled and ready to spring into action. His mind raced, scanning for any sign of movement, any potential threat that could derail the mission. But so far the compound was silent. Too silent. Mark, walking just ahead of John, kept his rifle raised, his eyes scanning the shadows. He was the team's muscle, always ready for a firefight. John could sense Mark's anticipation, the thrill of combat pulsing just beneath the surface. He knew Mark lived for this, but John's stomach churned at the thought of a firefight erupting in the tight confines of the compound. As they neared the main entrance, Salah split off from the group, heading toward the internal security hub.
"I'll handle comms from here,"
he said.
"No alarms, no reinforcements."
The rest of the team pressed forward, moving deeper into the heart of the compound. Joan's hands tightened around his weapon as they reached the entrance to the Duke's private quarters. This was it. Inside, Duke Darius Cool, the man responsible for the black market trade of Deridium, the man who had caused the death of the Prime Minister's son, waited, unaware of the death that was creeping toward him. Marta hacked into the door's control panel, her fingers moving with lightning speed as she bypassed the security protocols. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a long, dimly lit hallway. Sarah gave a silent signal, and they entered, moving like shadows. Joan's pulse pounded in his ears as they advanced, his eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. The corridor was lined with portraits of nobles and military leaders, a reminder of the Duke's wealth and power. But none of that mattered now. By the end of the night, Duke Darius would be dead. As they approached the final door, Sarah stopped, her voice a low whisper in John's ear.
This is it. Follow my lead.
John nodded, swallowing hard. His throat was dry, his palms sweaty. This was the moment. Sarah pressed the control panel, and the door slid open, revealing a vast chamber dominated by a large, ornate desk. Seated at the desk, his back to them, was Duke Darius Cool. John's heart raced as they moved into the room, their footsteps silent on the cold marble floor. The Duke was oblivious to their presence, his attention focused on the holographic display in front of him. Sarah raised her weapon, the silencer making a soft click as she aimed for the back of the Duke's head. Suddenly, a noise from the corridor, a faint metallic clink, made Sarah freeze. Joan's heart leapt into his throat. A moment later, the unmistakable sound of boots echoed from the hallway.
Mercenaries.
Sarah hissed through clenched teeth.
They're coming.
Before John could react, the door burst open, and a squad of heavily armed mercenaries stormed into the room, their weapons raised.
Take them out,
Sarah barked, diving for cover behind the desk. The room erupted into chaos. Joan's instincts kicked in as he darted behind a column, his weapon raised. Mark was already in the thick of it, firing controlled bursts at the incoming mercenaries. Bullets ricocheted off the walls, and the air filled with the deafening sound of gunfire. John peeked around the column, his pulse racing as he assessed the situation. The mercenaries were well equipped, their armor thick, and their movements coordinated. They weren't just hired muscle, they were professionals, and they were here to kill. Mark's voice came through the comms, sharp and urgent.
John, cover the left side. I'll take the right.
John moved quickly, his hand steady despite the chaos. He fired a burst of rounds at the mercenaries advancing on his side, the suppressor on his rifle muffling the shots. One mercenary went down, his body slumping against the wall, but two more took his place, their weapons trained on John.
Damn it!
John muttered under his breath, ducking as a hail of bullets tore through the air above him. Sun was already working on the mercenaries' tactics, laying down suppressing fire with a cold efficiency.
We're pinned down,
he said, his voice calm despite the situation.
John, can you get a better angle?
John's mind raced as he scanned the room. The mercenaries had the advantage of numbers, but they didn't know the layout as well as he did. There, a small alcove to his left, out of sight of the main entrance. If he could get there, he'd have a clean shot at the remaining mercenaries.
I'm moving,
John said, keeping his voice low. He darted from his position, weaving between cover as gunfire exploded around him. His enhanced reflexes kicked in, allowing him to move faster than the mercenaries could track. Within seconds, he reached the alcove, his heart pounding as he aimed his rifle.
Go for the leader.
Sarah's voice crackled in his ear.
Take him out, and the rest will scatter.
John's eyes locked onto the mercenary captain, a tall armored figure standing near the back of the group, barking orders to his squad. Without hesitating, John squeezed the trigger. The shot was perfect. The mercenary captain crumpled to the ground, a single bullet piercing his helmet. Chaos erupted among the remaining mercenaries. Confusion spread through their ranks as they lost cohesion, their movements becoming frantic. Mark seized the opportunity, firing in controlled bursts as he picked off the scattered mercenaries one by one. Sun moved in tandem, methodically eliminating the remaining threats. Within minutes, the firefight was over. The room fell into an eerie silence, the only sound the soft hum of the Duke's holographic display still flickering at his desk. Sarah stood from behind the desk, her expression hard as she looked down at the Duke, who remained oblivious to the violence that had just taken place.
Let's finish this,
she said coldly, raising her weapon once more. John stepped beside her, his breath steady now as he aimed his rifle.
For the Emperor,
Sarah whispered. A single shot rang out, and Duke Darius Cool slumped forward in his chair, dead. The room fell into a heavy silence as the final shot echoed through the air. Duke Darius Cool's body slumped forward over his desk, the holographic display flickering as his lifeless head knocked against it. The mission was over, the target eliminated. John's breath came in slow, controlled gasps, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. His hands tightened around his rifle as he scanned the room, the eerie quiet that followed the firefight settling over them like a thick blanket. The mercenaries lay scattered across the floor, their bodies still, the acrid smell of gunpowder and blood lingering in the air. Sarah lowered her weapon, her expression unreadable as she approached the Duke's lifeless form. She moved with the calm precision of someone who had done this too many times before. Without a word, she checked his pulse, confirming what they already knew. Duke Darius Cool was dead.
For the Emperor,
she muttered under her breath, the weight of the words lingering in the silence. John stepped forward, his heart still racing, though the immediate danger had passed. His eyes flicked over the scene, his mind struggling to catch up to what had just happened. The Duke, a man of immense power and influence, was now nothing more than a lifeless body slumped over a desk. It felt surreal, and yet the mission had been executed perfectly. They had infiltrated, taken out the target, and survived the firefight with the mercenaries. Sarah turned to the rest of the team, her face hard and focused.
We're not done yet. Marta, grab any data you can from the Duke's systems. We need evidence of his dealings, proof for the Emperor that we've wiped out the black market operation.
Marta was already moving, her fingers flying across her tablet as she tapped into the Duke's private terminal. The screens lit up with lines of code and encrypted files.
I'm in,
she said, her voice steady.
Give me a minute to pull everything.
Sun knelt beside one of the fallen mercenaries, methodically checking the bodies for any hidden threats.
No more surprises,
he confirmed.
But we need to move fast. Once the Duke's people realize what's happened, it won't take long for them to mobilize.
Mark, his usual grin still absent, wiped sweat from his brow as he slung his rifle back over his shoulder.
Can't say I'll miss this guy, but it feels good to have that part done. Now, let's get out before more companies show up.
John remained silent, his mind replaying the events of the last few minutes. The firefight had been intense, the mercenaries highly trained, but the team had worked like a well-oiled machine. Each member had played their part perfectly, and John felt a surge of pride in how he had handled himself. But there was something about watching a man die, seeing the life leave his body, that made John uneasy. This was the work of the shadows of the night, the Emperor's hidden hand, and now John was truly part of it. Sarah's voice cut through his thoughts.
John, stay sharp. We're not out of this yet.
John blinked and nodded, pulling his focus back to the present.
Right. What's next? We extract the data, and then we exfiltrate,
Sarah said, her tone clipped.
Our ride is waiting, but we need to get back to the landing zone before they detect us.
Marta's fingers continued to fly across the terminal, decrypting files faster than John could follow.
Almost there. Got it,
she said finally, a look of satisfaction crossing her face.
We've got records of every illegal Diridium deal he's made in the last 2 years. This is more than enough to destroy his network. Good,
Sarah said, her eyes cold.
Wipe the rest of the system. Leave no trace.
Marta nodded, her hands moving swiftly to erase the Duke's files from the terminal. Within seconds the screens went dark, leaving only the faint glow of emergency lighting illuminating the room. Sarah motioned to the door.
We're moving out. Sun, take point. Mark, cover the rear.
Sun was already at the door, scanning the hallway for any signs of movement.
Clear,
he said quietly. The team moved swiftly through the compound, their steps silent and calculated. John followed close behind Sarah, his senses heightened, every creak of the floor or flicker of a shadow putting him on edge. The firefight had been contained, but they were still deep in enemy territory. If the Duke's forces realized what had happened before they escaped, the mission could turn from a success to a disaster in seconds. As they moved through the dimly lit corridors, the enormity of the mission sank in. They had just assassinated one of the most powerful men in the Zilong sector, a noble with enough wealth and connections to challenge the Emperor. And yet, despite the power and influence Duke Darius had wielded, his life had ended in silence, a single shot to the back of the head in the shadows of his own fortress. John couldn't shake the surreal feeling that hung over him. They reached the outer edge of the compound, where Sun had disabled the perimeter defenses earlier. The path to the landing zone was clear, but John knew they couldn't afford to let their guard down. Marta's voice came through the comms, her tone tense.
"We've got a problem. I'm picking up movement. Multiple heat signatures converging on our position. Looks like a patrol just changed course."
Sarah's expression didn't waver.
"How far? 500 meters out. We've got maybe 2 minutes before they're on us."
Marta replied.
"Move,"
Sarah ordered, her voice firm but calm.
"We can't let them cut us off. Sun, keep an eye out for traps. Mark, be ready for anything."
They sprinted through the compound's outer corridors, moving with practiced efficiency. John could feel the tension building in his chest as the seconds ticked by. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every distant sound a potential ambush. He gripped his rifle tighter, his eyes scanning the path ahead.
"Trap."
Sun's voice cut through the silence as he stopped abruptly, raising his hand. Joan's heart skipped a beat as he watched Sun crouch down beside an innocuous-looking section of the floor.
"Pressure plate,"
Sun muttered, carefully disarming the explosive device.
"They rigged this place tighter than we thought."
John's pulse quickened. Every second they spent disarming traps was a second closer to the enemy catching up.
"Almost there."
Marta's voice crackled through the comms.
"I've got a visual on the patrol. They're closing in fast. Sun."
Sarah's voice had an edge to it, the urgency clear.
"Done,"
Sun said, stepping back from the now disarmed trap.
"Go."
They bolted down the corridor, the dim emergency lights casting long, ominous shadows as they raced toward the exit. John's lungs burned as he pushed himself to keep up, his mind locked in survival mode. They had made it this far, but it wasn't over yet. They reached the outer airlock, the final barrier between them and the landing zone. Sarah motioned for John to help her secure the door as the others moved into position. Marta's voice was tense over the comms.
"The patrol's almost on us. We've got maybe 30 seconds. Get ready."
Mark muttered, his rifle trained on the corridor behind them. The door slid open, revealing the dark, desolate landscape of the asteroid beyond. The landing zone was just ahead, the stealth ship waiting for them like a beacon of salvation.
"Move! Move!"
Sarah ordered, waving them through. John sprinted through the airlock, the cold, thin air of the asteroid biting at his face as they raced toward the ship. The sound of footsteps echoed behind them, heavy boots pounding against the metal floor as the patrol closed in.
"Contacts!"
Salah shouted, turning and firing a burst of rounds into the corridor. The sound of gunfire erupted behind them as the patrol engaged. John dropped into a crouch behind a jagged rock, his rifle at the ready as he returned fire. The mercenaries were well armed and disciplined, their shots precise as they advanced.
"Keep them off us,"
Sarah barked, her voice sharp as she moved toward the ship.
"We're almost out of here."
Mark, clearly in his element, fired controlled bursts, keeping the mercenaries at bay. Sun laid down suppressing fire with deadly precision, while Salah provided cover as the team began to fall back toward the ship. John's heart pounded in his chest as he fired at the advancing patrol. His shots were measured, his aim steady, but the mercenaries weren't letting up. He could see the determination in their movements. They knew they were dealing with professionals, and they weren't going to give up easily.
"John, fall back."
Sarah's voice snapped him out of his focus. He glanced over his shoulder, seeing the ship's hatch open, Marta already inside working to activate the ship's systems. They needed to move, and fast. John fired one last burst of rounds, then sprinted toward the ship, his legs burning as he pushed himself to keep up with the team. Mark and Sun were right behind him, their rifles still firing as they ran. The moment they reached the ship, Salah slammed his hand on the control panel, sealing the hatch behind them. The sound of gunfire was cut off, replaced by the low hum of the ship's engines coming to life.
"Strap in,"
Sarah ordered, moving to the cockpit as the ship lifted off the ground. John collapsed into a seat, his chest heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. His mind was still racing, the adrenaline from the firefight coursing through him. They had made it. The mission was complete, and they were alive. The ship shuddered as it broke free of the asteroid's gravity, the view of the compound fading into the distance. John stared out the window, watching as the Silong sector disappeared behind them, swallowed by the endless black void of space. It was over. Sarah's voice crackled over the comm.
Mission accomplished. Duke Darius is dead. We're heading home.
John let out a long breath, his body finally relaxing as the reality of their success sank in. They had done it. His first mission with the Shadows, and they had succeeded.